Part 63. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 621. Chapter 621 How can you speak for a bitch? When she thought about her son being upstaged by the prince, concubine Yu felt so angry that she wanted to eat him. Princess Yunyu felt helpless when she saw her mother-in-law's jealous and hateful look. Princess Yunyu certainly does not admit that her younger brother is worse than the prince, but when it comes to marrying a daughter-in-law, there is absolutely no comparison between the third prince's concubine and the crown princess. Just like what I said in Fenji Palace, the third prince's concubine didn't even have basic flexibility, so she didn't dare to make the decision without authorization and involve the third prince's concubine in the situation, for fear that the third prince's concubine would not understand the situation and mess up the matter. But look at the crown princess, she had no communication with the queen in the whole process, but she completely agreed with the queen in every word and deed, so that even she did not take any advantage. Looking at the mother-in-law's hateful expression, Yunyu persuaded her softly, Fan Kinjao is a smart person. It would be more appropriate for the mother-in-law to be careful in the future. Concubine Yu frowned, how can you speak for a bitch? In the final analysis, Fan Kinjao is just a without a father. Even now, her grandfather is still trying to fawn over me. Who is a mere Fan Kinjao? Yunyu felt quite headache after hearing this. In the past, in the palace, due to her status, she was lawless and did not take anyone seriously. But during this year at Yaeshi Pavilion, she understood that ability really had nothing to do with status. Just looking at the condescending look on her mother's face, Yunyu didn't know what to say to make her mother understand. Concubine Yu was of course not happy that her daughter came back all the way, but ended up helping Fan Kinjao. However, thinking that her daughter would still be of great use in the future, Concubine Yu could only persuade her, what we did this time was perfect, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten you back. As long as we can bring down the prince this time, no matter how smart Fan Kinjao is, he still has to hold on. Yunyu nodded, this is indeed correct. Otherwise, she would not have gone back to the main city so aggressively. Not far away, Fan Kinjao was gently sipping tea, taking in the expressions of Concubine Yu and Yunyu across from her. In order to consolidate Bailey Rong's position as the new emperor, Concubine Yu in her previous life married Yunyu to the current Minister of Household Affairs. It is not an exaggeration to say that a princess commits herself to a small servant and is married off. Hearing about the wedding day, Yunyu burst into tears. After all, Yunyu also wants to save face. But even so, it still did not shake Concubine Yu's mind. Just because the Minister of Household Affairs came from a prominent family, and his father was the governor of water transportation. I think back then, Concubine Yu even risked her daughter's life for her son. Now, I'm afraid nothing has changed. But Fan Kinjao could see clearly just now that she didn't know what Yunyu said. Concubine Yu was obviously unhappy, but Concubine Yu still suppressed her anger and took the initiative to talk to Yunyu. Such deliberateness, if it is not profitable, who would believe it? So even if Fan Kinjao couldn't hear the conversation over there, he knew in his heart that Yunyu was afraid of making big moves when he came back this time. The emperor is here. The prince has arrived. As Bai Tu's unique voice sounded outside the palace, Emperor Yongchang was seen walking towards with Bailey Fengming. Everyone in the palace stood up one after another, knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! May your royal highness live 1,000 years!" As the words fell, the hall fell into silence. Everyone knew in their hearts that even if they wanted to be flat, they would have to wait until the emperor sat on the high throne, so they were in no hurry. Fan Kinjao followed the crowd and knelt in the crowd. He also understood the process and kept his head down. A pair of cloud boots embroidered with golden clouds suddenly appeared in front of them. Following this, came the extremely familiar Zai Shu Xiang. Smelling this familiar smell, Fan Kinjao would be a fool if he didn't know who the visitor was. But what Fan Kinjao couldn't understand was that when she entered the door, she clearly saw that the prince's seat was placed under the emperor. What's going on when Bailey Fengming didn't accompany the emperor to sit down and ran in front of her? Just as he was thinking about it, he saw the beautiful hand in his memory stretched out in front of him. The long and full fingers were like a budding flower, blooming quietly in front of Fan Kinjao's eyes. Before Fan Kinjao could hesitate, the hand took the initiative to grab Fan Kinjao's hand and pulled her up. Fan Kinjao, who can figure out anyone's thoughts, really couldn't understand Bailey Fengming's thoughts at this moment, so much so that when he was pulled up, he was still confused and almost lost his balance. Fortunately, Bailey Fengming grabbed her waist first and fixed her to his side. That jade-like face and beautiful eyebrows are still the familiar look of Fan Kinjao. The palm held by Bailey Fengming felt slightly hot, and a slight itching sensation spread along the palm to his heart. Bailey Fengming actually wrote in her palm. Fan Kinjao felt a chill in his heart. After careful identification, all his suspicions turned into a chill. Reject. This is the word Bailey Fengming left in her palm. Although there is only one word, it is enough. I am afraid that the emperor is suspicious of Bailey Fengming's initiative to postpone the wedding, and is even more worried that Bailey Fengming had negotiated with her or the Hua family in advance to delay the wedding. So now, Bailey Fengming has the series of strange behaviors. To put it bluntly, the emperor was using Bailey Fengming's hand to test her reaction. While thinking about it, Fan Kinjao pushed Bailey Fengming away from him. The level of ferocity pushed Bailey Fengming to stagger. Seeing this, Emperor Yongchang narrowed his eyes slightly, his dark eyes darting between the two of them. Seems to be trustworthy, but not trustworthy. At this moment, Fan Kinjao looked towards Emperor Yongchang. Looking at Fan Kinjao's look, she seemed a little flustered and wanted to continue greeting the emperor, but what happened just now was not her initiative at all, and she was also very aggrieved at this moment. After struggling again and again, Fan Kinjao bowed to the emperor first, but what he said was extremely aggrieved. His Royal Highness said he would postpone the wedding. I know that my humble status is completely incomparable to His Highness, but now His Royal Highness is so frivolous with his courtiers in front of the emperor, but he has put the emperor in a bad position. Fan Kinjao said this very softly, but he choked on every word. It seemed as if he had really been greatly wronged. Bailey Fengming hurriedly walked over and grabbed Fan Kinjao's hand. You are full of nonsense. How can I allow you to be so presumptuous in front of my father? Fan Kinjao originally wanted to break free, but thinking about Bailey Fengming's words just now, she glanced at the emperor in front of her again. After all, she didn't struggle anymore and reluctantly allowed Bailey Fengming to hold her arm. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 622. Chapter 622. Isn't this an obvious show of affection? Emperor Yongchang's eyes looked sharply and deeply at the two of them. Fan Kinjao's face seemed to be full of grievances, but in fact, his palms were already wet with sweat. Although Bailey Fengming seems calm, it would be a lie to say that he is not worried at all. When he was in the imperial study room, his father Mingming was asking him about the affairs of Huaishang, and he was even more immersed in the amount of silver he got from selling the mines. But before leaving the house, his father suddenly suggested that he should seize the time to coax Fan Kinjao. Just after entering the door, his father led him directly towards Fan Kinjao. The so-called respect and reuse are nothing but profitable. In fact, his father still doubted him, even Fan Kinjao. After a long while, Emperor Yongchang smiled and said, "We haven't seen her for a long time, and the crown princess's temper is getting worse." Fan Kinjao was relieved in his heart, but his face was horrified and he said, "Your Majesty, forgive me." Emperor Yongchang actually felt very comfortable after hearing this. Fan Kinjao should be afraid of him. He is the most respected person in the world. There is no one in Ziliang who is not afraid of him. But if Fan Qingjao had to compromise entirely because he was afraid of him, he felt that it was not in line with Fan Qingjiao's character. So now Fan Qingjao is obviously afraid of him, but stubbornly calls him the emperor. This is the Fan Qingjao in his impression. Thinking of this, the smile on Emperor Yangchang's face deepened. When we were in the palace, I allowed you to change your story. Although the wedding was postponed, there is no doubt that you are the royal daughter-in-law. Fan Qingjao was silent, seeming to be still struggling. Bailey Fengming held Fan Qingjiao's hand tightly, and his gentle voice was almost coaxing. Shaking our father's worries is what we should do as juniors. Ayao, you can't be so willful. If you are angry, just come to me, but you must not be arrogant in front of father, you know? Such Bailey Fengming, on the surface, seems to be doting on Fan Qingjao, but in fact, between the lines, he is still full of awe and caution for the emperor. Fan Qingjao knew that Bailey Fengming was the cowardly and unopinionated prince in the emperor's heart. Therefore, the more kindly Bailey Fengming tried to persuade him, the more indifferent Fan Qingjao became. In this way, he could better highlight Bailey Fengming's extremely cowardly appearance. His Royal Highness is unattainable, and I dare not talk a lot. Bailey Fengming's brows were locked in helplessness. Ayao. Fan Qingjao shook off Bailey Fengming's hand, but seemed to feel that he was being presumptuous in front of the emperor. He quickly bowed to the emperor and saluted. It's my daughter-in-law's fault for making my father laugh. Emperor Yongchang looked at the scene in front of him with a smile, thinking in his heart, fearing that he was really suspicious. The people kneeling on the ground waited for a long time, but did not see the Emperor Xianping. They quietly raised their eyelids in surprise, and saw the scene in front of them. But the same thing is different in the eyes of other people. The princess is as cold as ice, but the prince is smiling like a flower. Isn't this an obvious show of affection? The most hateful thing is that, instead of showing off your affection, you have to show it off in front of the emperor. They didn't know whether the emperor was feeling sour or not, but their legs and waists were all sore now. Especially the princes not far away. Except for the fifth prince, who obviously had a look of disgust on his face, the other princes' expressions were indescribably ugly. From the founding of Ziliang to the present, which woman has not wanted to marry her husband and follow her husband? Now that the prince is holding the princess in his hands and pampering her like this, how can they establish prestige in front of their own princess in the future? Seeing the dark faces of the brothers around him, Bailey Rong sighed and said helplessly, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has a noble status and cannot be compared with us. Please bear with it. It would have been better not to say this, but once he said it, the eighth prince immediately became furious. They are both sons, so why should the prince be noble? If the prince was not born from the empress, who would he be? Bailey Rongs looked at the sullen face of the eighth prince, and hurriedly pretended to pull his arm. Eighth prince, don't be impulsive. The eighth prince actually didn't intend to cause any trouble, but after Bailey Rongs said this, everyone else looked at him. That look in his eyes, as if he didn't do something, he was cowardly and afraid of the prince. The eighth prince is a sharp-minded person. Even if he doesn't want to speak at this time, he still has to speak up. Otherwise, if it is really rumored that he is afraid of the prince, how can he still behave? His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is so majestic. He has just returned to the palace and done something so eye-catching. But even if His Highness the Crown Prince is eager to do something with the Crown Princess, he shouldn't waste other people's time. As soon as the eighth prince said these words, the whole hall was in an uproar. Even a fool can hear these words as harsh. Hearing this voice, the eighth prince felt despair. Concubine Zhang Shu's expression was naturally not much better, but with the emperor present, even if she wanted to fry her silly son, she could only endure it for the time being. Hearing this, Fan Qingjao and Bailey Fengming had no reaction. This temptation was initiated by the emperor, and now that the emperor is still standing here, who is their turn to clean up the mess? Sure enough, Emperor Yongchang's face turned gloomy after hearing these words. "You are so presumptuous, old man." This voice startled the eighth prince, who was so proud just now. Facing his father's anger, the eighth prince was afraid but did not feel that he was at fault. "Father, how could you be so far west? Today is a young year. Everyone is waiting for the banquet, but only because the prince and the princess were just two people and wasted everyone's time." Fan Qingjao wanted to laugh when he heard this. Even if the people present do not know what happened, since the emperor is present, no matter what kind of delay, it is approved by the emperor. So whose face does the eighth prince slap in the face now? It naturally belongs to the emperor. Furthermore, this is a deliberate test by the emperor. If the eighth prince is really responsible for causing trouble like this, does the emperor still need his face? Of course there is no need to ask for it anymore. So, even if the emperor was worried about his own face, he could not spare the eighth prince lightly. Emperor Yongchang almost died of anger after hearing what the eighth prince said. They were always criticizing the prince and the princess, but except for a few words when he was testing them, the two of them could not even say a word back when faced with the eighth prince's curses. "Come here. Drag the eighth prince down. Give me a hard beating. When will you realize your mistake? When will you throw him out of the palace?" Emperor Yongchang wanted to seal the eighth prince's mouth. The best way is to hit him with a wooden board, otherwise he will be beaten again. If you let Lao Ba's mouth continue to scold without any boundaries, there is really no need for his old face. At this time, concubine Jiangshu and the eighth prince were panicked, and they quickly climbed up to intercede with the eighth prince. But the anger in Emperor Yongchang's eyes was obvious, and he kicked concubine Jiangshu to the ground. Whoever pleads for mercy will be severely punished. Seeing this, concubine Jiangshu dared not speak. She saw her son being dragged out. With the help of the eighth prince, she also hurriedly chased him out. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 623. Chapter 623, Fan Qingjiao's wings must be broken. This situation made everyone a little dumbfounded. Even though Emperor Yongchang was concerned about his own face, he fed the eighth prince to the throne, but in the eyes of others, this was a clear preference for the prince and the princess. And why does the emperor want to pay more attention to the prince's performance? At this time, everyone looked down upon the prince and the princess, even if they didn't want to think highly of them. Especially those civil servants who had worked hard to please Prince Heshuo in the past few days secretly swore in their hearts that their wishes have not yet been achieved, and they still need to work hard. After tonight, they will continue to be stuck in Prince Heshuo's return. On the way home. As a result, the faces of the ministers of the third prince and his party became extremely ugly. Not to mention Bailey Rongs and Yu Gaifei, there were dark clouds overhead that were about to thunder. Bailey Rongs just wanted the eighth prince to come forward and attract the attention of others, so that everyone would not focus on the prince. Who would have thought that the eighth prince who he pushed out as a gun would actually push the prince to the highest point? Why didn't Queen Zhen 11 understand the emperor's temptation? She knew better that the emperor was worried about his old face before he beat the eighth prince. Thinking of a young couple who have been separated for a long time, what meeting is not just for you and me? In the end, it was his son and Xiao Qinjiao's turn, but they still had to act under the emperor's nose. Fortunately, the current ending is good. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Bailey Fengming and refused to go away. Bailey Fengming simply took Fan Qinjiao's hand and sent her back to the seat. He couldn't resist his father's speculations and temptations, but he could definitely let people know that he valued Fan Qinjiao. Fan Kinjao. As expected, he is a black-hearted fox, and he can easily do things like push people along with the current. Of course concubine Yu couldn't let the prince influence the pace of the banquet, so she winked at Yunyu beside her. Yunyu stood up and took advantage of the situation to hold the pot of wine in front of her in the palm of her hand. My daughter thought that her father would be in a good mood today, so she would drink. However, being drunk would harm her health, but she didn't want her father to spoil his mood. Last night this pot of medicinal wine is specially prepared. Although the taste is not as good as the fine wine in the palace, it is of great benefit to my father's body. Emperor Yongchang was naturally happy after hearing this. But just when Bai Tu came down to take the pot of wine from Yunyu, Emperor Yongchang looked at Fan Kinjao. Bai Tu was so smart that he immediately came to Fan Kinjao with the wine in hand. When Yunyu saw this, she would be lying if she said she wasn't surprised. Does your father trust Fan Kinjao so much now? Even the wine she brewed had to be tasted in front of Fan Kinjao. Fan Kinjao took the wine and opened it. He first poured out some and put it in front of his nose to smell it. Then he took a sip. Then he stood up and looked at the emperor and said, "White poria, chamomile, calamus, asparagus, pound them all, dip it into fine powder and soak it in wine. When the medicine is completely mixed with the wine, it can be used by ordinary people to moisturize the skin and strengthen the body." Yunyu. She seemed to know why her father believed in Fan Kinjao. After hearing this, Emperor Yongchang smiled heartily, looked at Yunyu and said, "After all, she is a daughter, but she is more careful than her son." Yunyu smiled awkwardly, not wanting to mention how she felt. This eye candy wine is unique to the medicine school, and it took her several months to learn the essence. In the end, Fan Kinjao knew the secret just by asking about it. Concubine Yu noticed her daughter's unhappiness and comforted her in a low voice. "Why should you be unhappy because of a bastard? Now that your father pays more attention to the prince, that will also follow the rising tide." Yunyu looked at her concubine's always aloof face and remained silent. She was indeed surprised that her father valued Fan Kinjao, but she was even more shocked by Fan Kinjao's medical attainments. It is said that the Tao family's medical women are good at making useless work, and it seems to be true. Just these words, Yunyu knew that it would be useless to tell her mother and concubine. The mother-in-law has a distinguished status. She is the legitimate daughter of the family. She has lived a pampered life since she was a child. She married her father, the empress, and the mother-in-law has been favored until now. For such a concubine who has been superior to others since she was a child, judging the value of other people's existence based on their status has long been a habit engraved in the bones. But Yunyu is different. During this year in Yaeshi Pavilion, she understood that strength is the fundamental explanation for everything. Yunyu looked at Fan Kinjao not far away again, slightly tightening the handkerchief in her hand. It doesn't matter if the mother-in-law doesn't understand, as long as she understands. When she comes back this time, she will definitely break Fan Kinjao's wings. Queen Zhen 11 has always been a watcher and listener. Seeing concubine Yu and Yunyu whispering to each other, she whispered to the emperor beside her, "Yunyu just returned to the palace last night, and she stayed overnight. The emperor makes wine, even if there is no credit, there is still hard work. The emperor would not neglect the child's heart." After hearing this, Emperor Yongchang naturally turned his attention to Yunyu. As a result, he also saw concubine Yu whispering something to Yunyu. Emperor Yongchang narrowed his eyes, half smiling. "You mother and daughter are chatting happily, I wonder what they are talking about." Faced with the emperor's sudden inquiry, concubine Yu and Yunyu were startled. After all, concubine Yu reacted quickly and said with a busy smile, "Isn't this Yunyu's cousin Baiyan here?" Yunyu was curious why she didn't see anyone. Emperor Yongchang knew in advance that concubine Yu's niece had entered the palace. Now he didn't see anyone and said, "Today is a family banquet. It's not that special. Since people are here, they should be allowed to attend. These words can be regarded as giving concubine Yu enough face. In the final analysis, she is the niece of concubine Yu. She is unknown and has no qualifications to participate in the royal banquet. Concubine Yu hurriedly stood up and said with a smile, "Your Majesty is generous, I know this, but my nephew is always shy and shy. Before I came here, I had someone accompany her to walk around the palace, which can be regarded as living up to my expectations, the emperor's favor." Emperor Yongchang nodded and said no more. The banquet was still going on. Everyone saw that the emperor was in a good mood, and the palace became more and more lively. When the singer left, the maids who had been waiting outside the door poured in to serve the dishes to the masters. Royal banquets are always divided into priorities, even the food. The emperor was the most lavish, with 66 dishes, followed by the queen, who had half of the emperor's dishes. Then come the princes and the high-ranking ministers. 20 of you, half meat and half vegetarian. As for the other female relatives, it is as simple as possible, which is basically just 3 dishes. Although the concubines can be better than other female relatives, they can only have 5 dishes at most. Those exquisite and delicious ones can be served first to the emperor, queen, concubines, princes, and ministers. The remaining ones were distributed among the concubines present. When it was the turn of the princess and the female family members, some dishes were even made from obvious leftovers. But everyone has long accepted such rules by default, and now it is not surprising. Fan Qingjie was a never-experienced crown princess, but she changed her tune after the emperor issued an order. Although her treatment was that of a crown princess, it was basically the same as the Princess Heshuo County around her. The Princess of Heshuo County was afraid that Fan Qingjie would not get used to it, so she wanted to whisper a few words of advice. As soon as she was about to speak, she saw another maid coming over carrying a tray. The dishes on the tray are both meat and vegetable, and the aroma is overflowing. Judging from the appearance, they should be from the prince's side. Just as the palace maid placed the dishes on the tray in front of Fan Qingjie one by one, the female relatives behind her also looked in Fan Qingjie's direction. Of course they know that such an occasion should not be heard or shocked. But facing such an exciting scene, who can really withstand it? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 624. Chapter 624 Concubine Yu's niece. After the palace maid finished serving the dishes, she said, "This is the prince's wish. I hope the prince will accept it." Everybody understood. This is because I didn't show enough affection in front of the emperor just now, and now it's getting in their way again. I remember that at the palace banquet, the prince would send all kinds of melons, fruits, pears, and peaches, which were good and expensive, in front of the princess as if they were dead. Facing such a scene, the women and ladies present were a little less stimulated. But for those who have already experienced it in the palace, this is a critical blow. What's the matter? I didn't enjoy sending gifts in the palace, and now I send them in the palace. The most irritating thing is that the 8th prince is still making plans outside. No matter what complaints everyone has, they have to swallow it in their own stomachs. What else can we do? Why don't you go out and have with the 8th prince? Fan Qingjie knew that Bailey Fengming was pretending to coax her and save her face. It's just concubine Yu's silence that made Fan Qingjie slightly surprised. With concubine Yu's competitive nature, she naturally made some sarcastic remarks, but now. Crash. Just as Fan Qingjie was thinking, he heard a commotion coming from the opposite side. Looking up, it turned out that a little palace maid accidentally poured the soup on the 5th prince's body when serving food. Although the soup is no longer hot, it is an unchangeable fact that the 5th prince has become a drowned rat. The little palace maid was so frightened that her face turned pale, and she knelt on the ground and kowtowed, "Your Highness, please calm down. It's all your fault." It's my fault that I didn't stand firm. I beg your highness to let me live. Bailey Lingyu was unhappy, but he was not a murderous demon either. Seeing the little palace maid, he almost fainted with fright, so he waved his hand hurriedly, "Go down." The little palace maid was relieved and followed the other palace attendants to retreat. The matter is not that big of a deal, but the emperor and everyone are still sitting here. It would be unseemly for the fifth prince to do so. Empress Zhen 11 suggested that the fifth prince go to the East Palace to change into the prince's clothes first. Bailey Lingyu and Bailey Fengming have always had a good relationship, and they did not refuse after hearing this. Besides, the queen is really ruthless, locking him in the house for more than 10 days. Now Bailey Lingyu shudders when looking at the queen. How can she dare to refuse? A small episode that gradually faded away as the fifth prince left. The sound of silk and bamboo in the hall started again, and everyone continued to have fun. At this time, everyone had been drinking for 3 times, and they were no longer as energetic as they were just now. Princess Heshuo, who had been holding back her words, broke down. Seeing concubine Yu conversing quietly with Yunyu again, she whispered softly, "Who in the palace doesn't know that what the queen longs for most is to have children?" Concubine Yu called Yunyu back at this time, but she gave the queen enough eye medicine. Hearing this, Fan Qingjao said softly, "The queen should be much calmer by now." The princess of Heshuo County was stunned. Fan Qingjao also told him what happened in Fenji Palace just to kill time. Princess Heshuo almost vomited after hearing this. It's true that every mother has her own child. Concubine Yu has been causing trouble for the queen in recent years, and now it's Yunyu's turn again. Fan Qingjao said, "Princess Yunyu is confident because concubine Yu is favored." Princess Heshuo County did not argue with Fan Qingjao. "That's true, since concubine Yu entered the palace, even if there are many more to follow, the concubine is favored, but in the end, the emperor is not going to Yu Palace, otherwise how can concubine Yu have the confidence now, and her niece will just ask her to enter the palace?" Speaking of this niece, Fan Qingjao thought that this person has not shown up yet. For a time, it would be a lie to say that I am not worried. After all, people like concubine Yu never talk nonsense or do unnecessary things. The princess of Heshuo County was really holding her breath, and she said whatever came to her mind. "Yesterday, when I was waiting for your adoptive father to return home at the gate of the palace, I met concubine Yu's nephew. She is a very eloquent person. She also took the initiative to say hello to me. I heard her last name was Yu, but I didn't realize her identity yet. Later, after asking, I found out that she was the nephew of concubine Yu." Fan Qingjao was about to say what a coincidence, but the words suddenly got stuck on his lips. Surname Yu. This last name feels familiar for some reason. When he thought about it carefully, Fan Qingjiao's heart tightened. That's right, the regent of Janai Kingdom said that night that the woman with whom the rumors spread about the fifth prince had a surname of Yu. Fan Qingjao looked at concubine Yu again, his heart beating wildly. If the person who spread the rumors with the fifth prince is really concubine Yu's niece, concubine Yu will definitely question the fifth prince in front of the emperor today, and then take the opportunity to embarrass the empress. After all, the mother and concubine of the fifth prince died early. Even if the fifth prince did not have the right experience to succeed to the queen is the mother of the sixth house. If there is a problem with the fifth prince's character, the queen will be in trouble. Take the blame. Concubine Ku not only didn't say anything from beginning to end, she also had no reaction at all. Isn't concubine Yu unaware of this? Will not. In the main city, all the princes are well informed. The rumors between the fifth prince and Miss Yu are so fierce that it is impossible for Bailey Wrongs not to know about it, and it is impossible for concubine Yu to be completely unaware of it. There was a banquet held today, and concubine Yu specially called her niece into the palace, but she never showed up. Thinking of this, Fan Qingjiao's heart suddenly rang with alarm bells. Broken. The fifth prince has just left the door, and now everyone's attention is on the main hall. If someone really lures the fifth prince away with ulterior motives, and then bumps into concubine Yu's niece, then if there is really a trouble, what? Based on the previous rumors between the fifth prince and the Yu family woman, how could anyone believe what the fifth prince said? At that time, the emperor, who was already partial to the imperial concubine, decided to let the fifth prince marry her in order to settle the matter. In this way, concubine Yu can be said to have set a pair of eyes under the eyes of the Queen Empress in an upright manner. And this person cannot be beaten or scolded, and he must let others live well in this world. Otherwise, if concubine Yu takes the opportunity to bite her back, the fifth prince will be completely doomed. Perhaps even Bailey Fengming will be implicated. After figuring out the intricacies, Fan Qinjiao looked at concubine Yu more deeply. After all, he is a veteran in palace fighting, and he is sure to kill him as soon as he takes action. In total, the fifth prince has been out for a while, and I am afraid it will be too late to chase him now. The most important thing is that since concubine Yu is planning this matter, she must keep a close eye on her and the queen. If they make any noise now, I am afraid that not only will they not be able to help the fifth prince, but they will also alert the enemy. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 625. Chapter 625 Is anyone so nagging? Fan Qinjiao was thinking about it, and his eyes fell on the food in front of him. The food in the palace is extremely rich, and there are all kinds of special cakes that cannot be eaten outside. Fan Qinjiao quickly filtered through the types of dishes and pastries again, and already had a plan in mind. Although this move is a bit risky, it is also the only way now. Bailey Fengming, who was sitting on the other side, looked at Fan Qinjiao with his brows furrowed and looking at the cake in front of him in deep thought. Bailey Fengming, who knew Fan Qinjiao too well, naturally knew that Fan Qinjiao would only show that look when he was thinking about things. Just as he was thinking about it, he saw Fan Qinjiao calling a palace maid in front of him and giving him unknown instructions. Not long after, the palace maid walked towards Bailey Fengming holding a tray. To report to His Highness the Crown Prince, the Crown Princess said that a person is not blessed to enjoy the delicacies sent by His Highness the Crown Prince, but she could not resist His Highness the Crown Prince's kindness, so she left some snacks such as pastries, and other servants gave them to her. His Royal Highness will return it. Hearing this, the princes around him felt a hint of schadenfreude in their eyes. Especially Bailey Rongs, looking at the food that was returned to the prince, he couldn't help but sneer in his heart. Even if he tried hard to please Fan Qinjiao, he ended up with a hot face but a cold butt. Bailey Fengming had no time to pay attention to the sarcasm of the princes around him. He looked at the food placed in front of him, and then at the food left by Fan Qinjiao, and he had some thoughts in his heart. The ones Fan Qinjiao left behind were all pastries made from green beans, and they were all the same in color. And if you look at it carefully, the pastries have to be made before he comes back, which is not as good as other foods that have to be made first. So, Fan Qinjiao wanted to remind him of the period before he came back. Thinking like this, Bailey Fengming pretended to be curious and looked at the second prince beside him. On the way back to the city, I heard from the people in the city that there was some commotion in the city some time ago, but because I was in a hurry, I didn't hear it. Ching, I wonder if the second emperor brother knows what happened. The second prince frowned. If the prince is really free, he might as well send someone to inquire about it himself. Among all the princes, the prince has had the least sense of existence since he was a child. If you say something unpleasant, anyone can step on it. Nowadays, although each prince has his own thoughts, they have a unified goal, which is to hate the prince. Who would have thought that a person who had been considered a soft persimmon by them since he was a child and who would not live long would instead have firmly held the position of prince over the years, and now he has gained the attention of his father. Bailey Fengming cowardly dodged his gaze and said in a good-tempered way, "What the second emperor brother said is that my father just happened to say in the imperial study room that he asked me to sit there more when I have time. Then I will ask him tomorrow. Ask your father." Hand, Dad Xian's meaning really shouldn't be too obvious. The second prince. Is there anyone so nagging? This is because you deserve a beating. Bailey Rongs was not willing to argue with Bailey Fengming for a moment, so he wanted to stop the second prince with words. Although the prince still looked weak and weak, except for these times, he could not get rid of him, so Bailey Rongs was still wary in his heart. But how could it be said that the second prince, who was so dazzled by Bailey Fengming, could be stopped? The fifth prince and the prince have a good relationship. This is something everyone in the palace knows. With the intention of stimulating Bailey Fengming, the second prince opened his mouth and said, "His Royal Highness is outside." Naturally, he doesn't know. If it was best some time ago, the news of laughter is that the fifth emperor brother made a rumor with some girl, but who knew that the rumors were all over the sky, but the fifth emperor brother dared to do it but did not dare to admit it, and was still imprisoned by the empress. That's when it stopped. Hearing these words, Bailey Fengming felt confident in his heart. If it was really because of a rumor, a Yao would not be so eager to hint him anything. Unless someone wants to make a fuss out of this matter. But things like honor cannot be recognized with red lips and white teeth. Unless everyone gets the stolen goods together. In this way, Bailey Fengming instinctively thought of concubine Yu's niece who had never shown up. Furthermore, the palace attendant just now deliberately put the soup on Bailey Lingyu. Everything seems to make sense. After thinking about everything, Bailey Fengming looked at Fan Qinjiao, originally wanting to tell her not to worry, but in the end he noticed the plates of green pastries placed in front of her. Bailey Fengming frowned. It seemed that his fifth brother was also wearing blue clothes today. The second prince felt even more proud when he saw that the prince remained silent for a long time. I'm afraid this person was greatly stimulated by him. Boom. As a result, just as the second prince was thinking about it, he saw a black shadow falling towards the ground. When the second prince looked at the prince who fell down at any time, they were all shocked. Even if you are stimulated, you don't need such a big reaction, right? The prince suddenly fell to the ground, which frightened everyone in the hall. Everyone stood up, but they didn't dare to act rashly when they saw the prince with a painful look on his face. When Emperor Yongchang saw that the prince had fallen, the first person he looked at was Fan Qinjiao. However, Fan Qinjiao stood up with everyone, but there was no trace of worry on his beautiful face. In this way, Emperor Yongchang is the way, teach the imperial doctor. Empress Zhen 11 said quickly, "Your Majesty, the imperial hospital is not very close to here, so we should let the crown princess take a look first." Emperor Yongchang was still counting on the Prince Zhou Xian Huaishang, and he didn't want anything to happen to the prince, so he looked at Fan Qinjiao and nodded, "Go ahead." Fan Qinjiao finally accepted the order and left his seat calmly. Fan Qinjiao was counting the time in his mind without taking a step. Although she knew that time was running out now, no matter how anxious she was, she could not show any flaws on her face. Finally reaching Bailey Fengming's side, Fan Qinjiao bent down to check, and after a while he replied, "The prince injured his heart and lungs when he was hunting in the palace last time. Now, even though he has recovered from a serious illness, the root of the disease is still there. Before my daughter-in-law, I have refined some life-saving elixir and handed it to His Royal Highness. You just need to keep it in your mouth and you will be fine for a while." Bailey Fengming opened his eyebrows in pain, but said, "Medicine, the medicine belongs to Shaoxian Shaofu." After hearing this, Emperor Yongchang immediately sent someone to pass Shaoxian over. Bailey Rong saw that everyone was looking this way, so he personally helped the prince up from the ground, and carefully let him lean on the chair to get ready, with a caring and anxious look on his face. But it's very much like brotherly love. Fan Kinjao felt sick in his heart when he saw Bailey Rong's hypocritical appearance. For this kind of superficial skill, indeed no one can compare with Bailey Rong's. Everyone felt relieved when they saw that the prince's expression softened a lot. "What's wrong with the prince? You're still suffering from heart disease despite everything going well? I remember you were not in good health when you were a child. I thought you would be tougher if you were older, but now it's become more serious." Yunyu didn't know when to leave. The one who came over cried and rushed towards Bailey Fengming's body, and his hand quickly pressed down on Bailey Fengming's wrist. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 626. Chapter 626. Something happened after all. Although everything happened suddenly, the people in the hall were not surprised. Yunyu had been in close contact with the prince since she was a child, and she had the best relationship with the queen among the children. Now it's just the younger sister who is worried about her older brother. It's understandable for everyone who sees it. But Yunyu's hand could not escape Fan Kinjao's eyes. No matter how much Bailey Fengming pretends to look like him, his pulse cannot be deceived. If Yunyu discovers that Bailey Fengming is pretending to be ill, not only will the matter of rescuing the fifth prince be exposed, but with the emperor's paranoia, he may even be suspicious of whether Bailey Fengming is really alive or dead in the palace. But Yunyu made such a good impression on everyone that Fan Kinjao had no reason to stop Yunyu. As he was thinking about it, Fan Kinjao turned his wrist and caught a silver needle between his fingers. While Yunyu was quietly testing Bailey Fengming's pulse, Fan Kinjao pretended to observe Bailey Fengming's condition, blocked everyone's sight with his body, and quietly inserted the silver needle into Bailey Fengming's chest. Yunyu, who took a step forward and pressed Bailey Fengming's wrist, could detect the steady pulse of Bailey Fengming, but just as she was thinking about how to expose the matter, she felt a strange pulse under her finger. Immediately afterwards, the pulse, which had been stable just now, felt like pressing a piano string. The end is straight and long, the string is thin and stringy. If you just look at this pulse condition, there is indeed something wrong with your heart and lungs. But Yunyu couldn't figure it out. It was clear just now that her pulse was fine. Could it be that she felt wrong? At this time, Xiaoxian entered the door under the leadership of the eunuch. Seeing this, Yunyu could only retract her hand and warned, "The prince's pulse is indeed ominous, but he must take a good rest." Bailey Fengming smiled weakly and said, "I'm sorry, Princess Yunyu, I'm sorry." Yunyu nodded and turned back to her seat. Fan Kinjao took out the silver needle and put it back into his sleeve while everyone was looking at Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian knelt on the ground to greet Bailey Fengming, "I give this to His Highness the Crown Prince. It's important to save people at this time." Taifu Xiaoxian should quickly take out the medicine and give it to His Royal Highness. Fan Kinjao seemed to be pulling Xiaoxian to stand up, but in fact he stuffed the ginseng pills he was carrying in his arms out of Xiaoxuan's hands. It is the habit of Tao family medical girls to carry many life-saving medicines with them so that they can save people's lives in case of emergencies. Xiaoxian didn't know what kind of medicine the Crown Princess gave him, but the idea that the Crown Princess would never harm the prince had already been welded into his head, so he didn't have any scruples at the moment. He opened the medicine bottle, took out the pills and stuffed Bailey Feng into it. Ming's mouth. Bailey Fengming also believed in Fan Kinjao, but this medicine. It is really bitter. Fan Kinjao pretended to observe Bailey Fengming's face again, and then said to the emperor, "The prince is fine." Hearing this, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Especially the second prince, who was holding his breath so hard that he almost choked himself to death. Who would have thought that this prince would fall down at his word? He was frightened to death. The prince is safe, and Xiaoxian will leave too. However, before Xiaoxian left, Bailey Fengming stopped him and warned him, there doesn't seem to be much of this medicine left. You can go to the Crown Princess to get some in a few days. Xiaoxian nodded drowsily on his face, but in his heart he felt the words written by the prince on his palm with great energy. Xiaoxian stayed with Bailey Fengming for much longer than Lin Yi. In the past, when it was inconvenient for the two of them to talk, they used this method to communicate. Now, even though Bailey Fengming's writing was sloppy, Xiaoxian already knew it in his heart. Concubine Yu kept her eyes on Bailey Fengming. She waited until Xiaoxian left the door before she withdrew her gaze and asked Yunyu beside her, "Are you sure the prince is really sick?" Yunyu nodded, "It is indeed Xian Mei." Concubine Yu felt relieved when her daughter said so definitely. Now the fifth prince is afraid that he has taken the bait. As long as the prince and Fan Qinjiao don't go out to cause trouble, the matter will be settled. Concubine Yu knew very well that as long as something happened, even if the queen didn't want to, she would still watch her niece marry the fifth prince as a concubine. No one in this palace knows that the fifth prince and the prince are inseparable. So as long as you control the fifth prince, you have control of all the prince's movements. At that time, not only will the prince be in control, but he will also be able to give the queen a hard time. That scene makes Concubine Yu laugh just thinking about it. Fan Qinjiao looked at the smile in Concubine Yu's eyes, and her heart was still beating hard. Everything that needs to be done has been done, now it depends on whether Xiaoxian can make it in time. Emperor Yongchang was really happy today and drank up all the wine Yunyu sent him. Empress Zhen 11 looked cheerful on the surface, but in fact, she was always thinking about what had just happened. Fengming's body, Xiao Qinjiao told her personally, it was a near miss and there would be no sequelae. Did Fengming just act deliberately? But what is the purpose of doing this? Just as Queen Zhen 11 was thinking about it, she saw a young hurriedly entered the door, looking very panicked. As soon as Queen Zhen 11 saw the young eunuch's appearance, her heart sank. I'm afraid something happened. Seeing that there were many people in the hall, Bai Tu wanted to stop the little first, but when he hurried towards the little eunuch, he heard the little say, "No, it's not good. Miss Yu fell into the water." As soon as these words came out, everyone in the hall was stunned. Everyone is wondering, who is Miss Yu? Just when everyone was confused, Concubine Yu, who was sitting in the seat, suddenly stood up, grabbed Princess Yunyu beside her and said, "Yes, something happened to your cousin." It was only then that everyone remembered that she was the niece of Concubine Yu. Concubine Yu seemed to be really scared. She didn't care about the people in the hall and stumbled out the door. She even forgot about the etiquette of kneeling to the emperor. Seeing how anxious his mother and concubine were, Bailey Rongs also stood up. He just assumed that the emperor was still sitting on the seat and did not dare to act rashly. Yunyu turned around and knelt in front of the emperor and the queen. "I beg the queen to send someone to rescue my cousin. If something happens to my cousin in the palace, my mother and concubine will probably blame herself for the rest of her life." It was obvious that there were two people kneeling, but in the end they were begging the queen. It seems that as long as Queen Zhen 11 hesitates, she is disregarding the lives of others and is a heinous crime. Empress Zhen 11 was not stupid. She could not overstep even if the incident happened suddenly. She quickly looked at the emperor beside her and said, looking at the way the imperial concubine rushed out just now, "I am afraid she is really anxious." "Your Majesty, look." What else could Emperor Yongchang say? He could only stand up and walk out with the support of the queen. When the princes and princesses present saw this, they naturally followed closely behind. As for the other ministers and women, they all stood up and knelt down to leave. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 627. Chapter 627. Concubine Yu, who spent a lot of money. Fan Qinjiao followed the second princess and Pan Yulu, and followed everyone out of the hall under the leadership of the young eunuch. It was already dark outside, and the cold wind blew past my ears. The biting coldness hit the ground, but it froze everyone severely. Fan Kinjao sat silently on the flat palace road, thinking that he was lying if he said he wasn't nervous. Since someone came to report it, it meant that Concubine Yu's plan was successful. At least, everything should be going according to Concubine Yu's plan. Could it be that I was wasted too much time in the main hall just now, so I didn't have time to inform the fifth prince? If this is the case, things will really become troublesome. But no matter how troublesome it is, Fan Kinjao has made plans to never let Concubine Yu have her wish. The emperor was already watching her and Bailey Fengming's every move with eager eyes. If Concubine Yu was allowed to interfere again, it would undoubtedly make matters worse. Everyone walked very fast, and within a short time they caught up with Concubine Yu, who ran out first. Yunyu and Bailey Rong saw this and hurriedly walked over, supporting Concubine Yu on the left and right. Concubine Yu had already burst into tears. She turned her head and looked at the emperor with sadness. "Your Majesty, I miss my mother's family, so I wanted to let my niece into the palace to be my companion. But the result was, after hearing such bad news, if something really happened, the emperor would have to make the decision for me." Even Fan Kinjao was secretly surprised when he saw Concubine Yu like this. Fan Kinjao knows better than anyone how much dignity Concubine Yu has. But now Concubine Yu is crying so shamelessly, which shows that she has really spent a lot of money today. Emperor Yongchang looked at his beloved concubine, who he had loved for many years, and was now crying so hard that he would be lying if he said he didn't feel sorry for her. In his heart, Concubine Yu has always been strong, and she rarely cries on weekdays, but now she looks really sad and worried. Thinking like this, Emperor Yongchang's heart softened. As soon as Queen Zhen 11 saw the change in the emperor's face, she understood. By the way, Concubine Yu did not seduce the emperor by changing her ways every day or two. In the past, she just let it go, but now, whether it is for her son or daughter-in-law, she cannot allow the emperor to be seduced by Concubine Yu's old fox again. Concubine Yu is crying so much that even this palace feels distressed when she sees it. But now no one knows what happened. How can Concubine Yu talk about the emperor making the decision? I heard that she fell into the lake. In my opinion, it should be let's go and see what's going on first. Yunyu and the third prince, please help Concubine Yu and don't let her get bumped in the cold weather. Emperor Yongchang also reacted after hearing the queen's words. It is the queen who is calm after all. Empress Zhen 11 lowered her eyes implicitly. It is my duty to share the emperor's worries. Yongchang Divan, who was completely brought back to his senses, immediately asked Bai Tu to continue to lead the people to clear the way ahead. Concubine Yu saw the duck flying away from her mouth, and she scolded all 18 generations of the queen's ancestors in her heart. Yunyu and Bailey Rongs also looked bad, but their father had already given the order. If they made any excuses to delay, they would be suspicious, so they could only help Concubine Yu and continue on their way. Everyone followed the little who led the way and walked around for a long time before arriving at a remote garden. This garden is different from other gardens. There is no sight of winter plum blossoms, and it does not have the magnificence of rugged rock areas. Instead, there are just patches of desolation. It can be seen that this place has been abandoned for some time. As the crowd got closer, they heard the sound of churning water coming from the lake not far away. Under the moonlight, a vague figure could be seen, struggling in the lake. In the empty abandoned garden, there was only one figure fluttering not far away. Such a strange scene made my face turn pale with fright, and I almost fainted. Ghost, there is a ghost. When Emperor Yongchang heard this, he subconsciously stopped. Concubine Yu felt unhappy after hearing this. But looking at the niece who was still splashing in the lake, I felt very suspicious in my heart. How come there is only one person? Where is the fifth prince? Yunyu and Bailey Rongs glanced at each other quietly, feeling a little unsure in their hearts. After all, what is happening now does not seem to be quite what they expected. Bailey Fengming coughed and then weakly suggested, always bring people up first. Emperor Yongchang reacted and quickly called Bai Tu to lead people to rescue him. Fan Qinjiao looked at the palace people who jumped into the lake and carefully observed the movements on the lake. Finally, he saw that the palace people only rescued one person ashore, and the hands that had been clenched loosened. According to concubine Yu's plan, she was afraid that she would lure the fifth prince here, and then let her niece fall into the lake accidentally. As long as this person falls in front of the fifth prince, once the fifth prince rescues the person, it will be beyond the etiquette between men and women. In addition, coupled with the rumors some time ago, even if the fifth prince does not want to marry, it will not work. And if the fifth prince doesn't save him, it's obvious that he will die without saving him. According to concubine Yu's plan, if her goal is not achieved, she will drag the fifth prince along with her for half her life. Nowadays, there are constant disputes in the court, and those ministers who want to side with the prince are watching with wide eyes. If the fifth prince who has always been friends with the prince is really forced to marry the niece of concubine Yu, who will dare to work for the prince in the future? Fortunately, the fifth prince is not here now. Although we still cannot take it lightly, it is always better than being blocked. Your Majesty, we have been rescued. Bai Tu hurried over and reported back. After hearing this, concubine Yu quickly walked over with Yunyu and Bailey Rongs. It was freezing cold outside. Emperor Yongchang originally planned to take concubine Yu's niece to the palace first, and then ask about other things. However, when he saw concubine Yu walking up to his nephew's side, he bent down and pounced on her. Seeing this, the palace people did not dare to come forward to persuade him. Queen Zhengzi said softly, "Your Majesty, you'd better go over and see for yourself. Your woman is acting like a monster in this ice and snow. If you don't go and endure the cold, who will?" Emperor Yongchang had no choice but to move forward, and everyone followed him towards the lake. At the edge of the lake, the woman held in concubine Yu's arms was so cold that she could hardly open her eyes. Her whole body was trembling, and the sound of her teeth chattering up and down could be faintly heard. As if she heard the footsteps, the woman suddenly opened her eyes. When she saw the dragon robe of Emperor Yongchang from the corner of her eye, she grabbed concubine Yu's hand and cried, "My aunt wants to make the decision for me. I stayed well in this garden, and then I saw the fifth prince. I thought that I was already an old acquaintance with the fifth prince, so I thought it would be okay to say hello to the fifth prince. Who knows, the fifth prince he was actually touching me. I was scared to death and struggled hard. 5. The fifth prince was afraid that I would disturb the others, so he pushed me in anger." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 628. Chapter 628, Far away in the horizon and close at hand. As soon as this statement came out, everyone was shocked. Even if concubine Yu's niece didn't insist that it was the fifth prince who pushed the person down, the dirty things the fifth prince did were enough to make everyone present swallow a big whale. It was at this time that everyone realized that the woman who had been rumored was actually the niece of concubine Yu. Concubine Yu seemed to be surprised when she heard this. "Baiyan, are you sure you are the fifth prince?" Yu Baiyan nodded weakly. "I have dealt with the fifth prince before, so I am sure now." After hearing this, Yunyu seemed to be extremely angry. How could brother five emperors do such a thing? This is simply going to ruin Sister Baiyan's reputation. Now that Sister Baiyan's life has been saved, how will I behave in the future? Bailey Rongs hurriedly persuaded in a low voice, "Sister, please don't talk nonsense. You can't trust one person's words about this matter. Besides, I believe that the fifth emperor brother is not that kind of person." Fortunately, Fan Kinjao didn't eat in the main hall just now, otherwise he would have probably vomited everything out after seeing Bailey Rong's hypocrisy. It's obviously a mother and son teaming up to put on a show, but they still pretend to be good people to gain fame. It's really hypocritical. Of course, Empress Zhengzi could not let concubine Yu perform a play here with her two children. She said slowly, although I am very sympathetic to the experience of concubine Yu's niece, but as soon as you say it, you must say it the evidence, this is in the palace, and the person involved is a prince. You can't just rely on red lips and white teeth to make everyone believe it. Don't you think so, Your Majesty? Of course Queen Zhen 11 wants to remind the emperor that if her son really does such a thing, you, the father, will be disgraced. So even for the sake of your own old face, you have to deal with it impartially. In Emperor Yangchang's heart, no one could compare to his face and reputation. After hearing the queen's words, he said, what the queen said is very true. Yunyu didn't expect that the queen's mother-in-law could calm down her father with just one word, and she felt awestruck in her heart. This kind of queen is far from what she had in mind. After all, the former empress, at best, was aloof from the world, but at worst, she allowed herself to be oppressed by her mother and concubine. Queen Zhen 11 saw the shock in Yunyu's eyes, and her heart became colder. She didn't fight in the past because she didn't have the confidence. At that time, humiliating herself was the only weapon she had to protect herself and Feng Ming. But now it is different. Feng Ming and Xiao Qinjiao are so busy, aren't they trying to have a peaceful future? As a mother-in-law, if she doesn't be tough and fight for her two children with all her life will really be in vain. Concubine Yu waited for a long time, but did not see the emperor speak again. She could only ask the niece in her arms again, the queen is right, slandering the prince is a serious crime. How can you be sure that the person is the fifth prince? Yu Beiyan seemed to have been greatly wronged and cried, although my nephew has a humble status, she also knows all the rules that she should know. If she doesn't really affirm the fifth prince, how can she dare to slander him out of thin air? Now Beiyan, I just want to ask my aunt, is the fifth prince wearing Xingyi today? These words made everyone present tremble. Just because the fifth prince today is indeed wearing Xingyi. Yu Beiyan never appeared in the main hall from beginning to end, so it was impossible to know in advance what the fifth prince was wearing. Such certainty now proves that everything Yu Beiyan said is true. Seeing that the evidence was solid, concubine Yu turned to look at the emperor. Your Majesty, you must make the decision for me. If Beiyan has really been wronged, how can I have the face to see her again in the future? Someone from my mother's family. Emperor Yongchang frowned, wishing he could rectify the fifth prince on the spot right now. Bailey Fengming, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, if it's Xingyi, it is true that only the fifth emperor's brother wore it at today's banquet, but there is no guarantee that no one in the palace will wear the same clothes. I wonder if the Yu family girl can still wear it. Can you think of any other details? Yu Beiyan was a little impatient after hearing this. But when Bailey Fengming asked, his tone was gentle and slow, and his words and deeds were even more polite. Looking at his handsome face under the moonlight, Yu Beiyan could only grit her teeth and spit out her last trump card, follow me. When the fifth prince was entangled, the little girl accidentally saw that the sleeves of the robe the fifth prince was wearing were embroidered with bat patterns. Concubine Yu was afraid that Bailey Fengming would ask more questions, so she hugged Yu Beiyan in her arms and said warily, what does the prince mean by these words? I know that the prince has a good relationship with the fifth prince. Now the fifth prince is doing this. If such a beastly thing happened, wouldn't it be possible for the prince to help the fifth prince eliminate the evidence of his crime? Bailey Fengming nodded slightly. He couldn't confront concubine Yu head-on. But he can't, but the queen can. I know that the incident happened suddenly. Concubine Yu loves the younger generation very much, but as the saying goes, caring leads to chaos. The prince just asked as usual. Why should concubine Yu be so aggressive? The prince has been in the hall all the time, and now he is standing next to concubine Yu. In front of you, concubine Yu is making such speculations. Where does she put the emperor? Concubine Yu was anxious just now, fearing that the prince would lead her away, so she spoke without thinking. Now she was hit on the head by the queen, which can be said to be a serious blow. Seeing this, Yunya quickly took the initiative to apologize to the queen. "Mom, please calm down. I have no other intentions. Since my father is here, I hope that my father can make the decision on this matter." Emperor Yongchang was already agitated by the cold wind, but after hearing Yunya's words, he immediately ordered, "Come here. Find me the fifth prince." Hearing this, Baitu quickly turned around with the others. In the end, I saw the fifth prince standing in the crowd. Baitu has never been so afraid of my prince's face as he is now. He was so frightened that he let out an ouch and almost sat down on the ground. Following Baitu's shocked gaze, everyone instinctively turned their heads. Naturally, they all saw the fifth prince who was standing beside them at some point. Bailey Lingyu touched his nose and said, "You guys are looking at me like this. I'm not a ghost. Everybody. You can watch your own excitement with such peace of mind. Fifth prince, you are also a talent." Emperor Yongchang looked at Bailey Lingyu and was furious. "Evil obstacle. You can't come here yet." Bailey Lingyu hurriedly walked out of the crowd and respectfully greeted the emperor. "My son, I would like to greet my father, the emperor." Emperor Yongchang is cold and angry now. What else can he do? Concubine Yu looked at the slippery fifth prince and pointed angrily. Now that everyone has gained the stolen goods, what else can the fifth prince say? Bailey Lingyu is different from Bailey Fengming. He is not a prince, so he does not need to care about the opinions of others. He does not have a mother-in-law, and he does not have to worry about angering concubine Yu. It is not easy for a mother-in-law and concubine to live in the palace. So now facing concubine Yu's angry finger, Bailey Lingyu didn't intend to get used to it. Who is getting the stolen goods? What is concubine Yu talking about? Why can't I understand? Just now I saw concubine Yu crying and crying. He was shouting. Maybe his mind was stimulated by something. In my opinion, I'd better ask the imperial doctor to take a look at it. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 629. Chapter 629. I'm just confused. Concubine Yu. Are you calling her crazy? Bailey Rongs frowned and stood up. "Fifth Emperor brother, how could you speak so rudely in front of my father?" Bailey Lingyu laughed angrily. "We must speak with conscience. Concubine Yu is forcing me to marry her niece. Do I still have to pretend to be a fool and clap my hands? Bailey Rongs, do you really take me seriously? Silly, isn't it? You. What am I? Don't think that you can bully brother Huang before and you can bully me now. I tell you Bailey Rongs, if you want to throw dirty water on me, just bring out evidence." Bailey Rongs was so angry that his chest was wheezing. When the mother-in-law was planning the plan, he said that the fifth emperor's younger brother was a thorn in the side, but the mother-in-law didn't listen. Bailey Lingyu turned around and knelt in front of the emperor. "I have never had a concubine since I was a child, but my concubine is a person who lives an open and honest life. Now some people have lost their mother and concubine because of my son. I want to stuff the mouse into urchin's mouth, and I beg my father to make the decision for me." Dead mouse. Yu Beiyan, who was nestled in concubine Yu's arms, almost pushed her head forward when she heard this. Emperor Yongchang has always been a little partial to this fifth son. After all, he is the one who reassures him the most among all the princes. Now after listening to these words, although his face is still gloomy, his tone has softened a lot. Fifth son, you and I, to be honest, you really don't know concubine Yu's niece. Bailey Lingyu said frankly, I did meet with an injustice on the road in the city some time ago, and I did save a woman, but I don't know her identity. If I know that the story of the farmer and the snake will happen to me, it would have been better for me to just watch her die. Yu Baiyan liked the fifth prince a little. After all, the fifth prince really wanted to save her. That's why she couldn't accept it when facing the fifth prince now. Seeing that the fifth prince was a stranger to her, she suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs, Your Majesty, fifth prince, how can you not admit what you have done? Just now you told me by the lake that as long as I obey you, then I would beg the emperor to marry me, but now that you have changed your clothes, are you refusing to admit what you just did? Bailey Lingyu was shocked by the harsh sound. She turned her head and just looked at concubine Yu and said, Concubine Yu, is your niece also mentally ill? Concubine Yu. Smelly boy, you're not done yet, are you? Yu Baiyan was, after all, a noble lady raised in a mansion. She had never been ridiculed in public like this before. She jerked away from concubine Yu, just to jump into the lake again. This move shocked everyone present. Yunyu and Bailey Rongs quickly pulled the person back. Yu Baiyan looked at concubine Yu, knelt on the ground again and cried loudly, If something like this happens, and His Highness the Fifth Prince refuses to admit it, I have no choice but to die and give myself a clean slate. I hope my aunt won't blame me. I didn't mean to cause trouble to my aunt. Silly boy, what are you talking about? Don't worry, the emperor will definitely make the decision for you. Concubine Yu bent down and hugged Yu Baiyan in her arms. Invisible to everyone, she hugged her slightly. Red lips. As expected of a person who has been carefully trained by his family, he is actually good at getting things done. Of course Emperor Yongchang couldn't really let people kill people under his nose. He looked at the fifth prince and asked, Where are the clothes you changed? Bailey Lingyu snorted, It's in the East Palace. I just don't know if it has been taken to be washed. Emperor Yongchang turned to look at Bai Tu and ordered, Go and get someone to bring the clothes. Everyone who has touched the clothes should also be brought to me. Bai Tu bowed his head and accepted the order, and quickly led the people towards the direction of the East Palace. Yu Baiyan felt a lot more at ease as she watched Bai Tu and his group leaving in a hurry. Although the fifth prince did not look down on her, when she was standing here just now, she did see the fifth prince wearing a green suit. She could clearly see through the moonlight that the patterns on the fifth prince's sleeves were bad patterns. What Yu Baiyan didn't expect was that she deliberately fell into the lake while the fifth prince was around. She thought that the fifth prince would come to save her like before, but she didn't expect that the fifth prince would just leave. Fortunately, she paid attention and wrote down the patterns on the fifth prince's sleeves in advance. Once the clothes were brought, the fifth prince could no longer quibble. Huh, a voice of doubt suddenly rang out from the crowd. Everyone looked around and saw the crown princess holding her chin, wondering what she was thinking. Concubine Yu glanced coldly, but was too lazy to speak. Of course she didn't believe that Fan Qinjiao could make any waves. But Yunyu, who had dealt with Fan Qinjiao head-on, quickly looked at Pan Yulu opposite. Pan Yulu understood, and hurriedly stepped forward and pulled Fan Qinjiao's sleeve to persuade her, I know that the crown princess has a good relationship with the fifth prince. In fact, I don't believe that the fifth prince can do such a thing, but I believe that the emperor will definitely find out the truth. It is better for the princess not to overstep her authority in front of the emperor. Hearing these words, Fan Qinjiao looked at Pan Yulu in front of him coldly. I thought Pan Yulu had understood her method when dealing with Fan Swinning last time. Now it seems that Pan Yulu is not afraid of death. Pan Yulu. Of course she is afraid of death. But as the third prince's concubine, does she have other choices? The crown princess has always been calm, but I am very curious about the crown princess's doubts. Of course, Empress Zhen 11 could not let others stop her daughter-in-law's mouth. Fan Kinjao took a few steps forward and said curiously, "The moonlight is thick now. Even if you come with a lantern all the way, you will inevitably trip over the stones on the ground. But the palace servant who came to deliver the message, I have good eyesight, and I saw at a glance that the person who fell into the water was Concubine Yu's nephew." Concubine Yu's heart skipped a beat and she opened her mouth to reply. Yunyu, however, had quick eyesight and quick hands. She grabbed her mother-in-law's sleeve, looked at Fan Kinjao with a smile and said, "The princess doesn't know something. The palace servant who sent the message is the mother-in-law's palace, and he is also the one who has been accompanying Bayan's cousin. Take care of you." Fan Kinjao nodded as if he was belatedly. Yunyu secretly breathed a sigh of relief when she saw this. Unexpectedly, Fan Kinjao suddenly looked at the little who was delivering the message. "Since you have always been with Concubine Yu's nephew and daughter, why didn't you save someone immediately when you saw someone falling into the water? Fortunately, there are no distinguished guests from the Janai kingdom today. If you didn't come to the banquet, wouldn't it be rude to Ziliang?" Fan Kinjao's words were deliberately exaggerated, but everyone present had a different taste. "Yes, even if you keep a dog with you, if you see your master falling into the water, the dog will jump in to save him. Is it possible that the people of Yu Palace are not even as good as dogs? Or perhaps, this young deliberately wanted to publicize this matter. As for the purpose of publicizing the matter, it is something that everyone understands tacitly." Facing such a simple truth, even the sixth prince, who had always been concerned about when he could leave the palace, understood it, not to mention the always jealous emperor. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 630. Chapter 630, Concubine Yu, it turns out you have this day too. The little didn't expect that the crown princess would suddenly point the finger at him, and he was so frightened that he knelt on the ground. "Dang, the incident happened suddenly, slave, slave, I only thought about the imperial concubine, Miss Bayan," and she hurried to inform the imperial concubine. Fan Kinjao said, "It turns out that I didn't know that the slaves in the palace could be so careless about the life of their master. I was really anxious for a moment, so I thought of informing the imperial concubine quickly. After all, the imperial concubine had repeatedly warned me before she left that I must take good care of Miss Bayan. If that's really the case, then why did you keep silent for so long about how Concubine Yu's niece fell into the lake? If you really follow what Concubine Yu's niece said, you should have seen the fifth prince. But why didn't you say anything? Or did you say that you didn't see the fifth prince at all?" The little never imagined that the princess, who usually looked silent, would be so difficult to deal with at the critical moment. Just now in this garden, in order to attract the fifth prince, he deliberately stayed far away, and saw a man in blue clothes entering the place, but he could not see clearly whether it was the fifth prince or not. But now when faced with the crown princess's question, the young had to nod even if he didn't see clearly. Concubine Yu's face turned cold when she saw that the young was forced to stop talking by Fan Kinjao. "What does the crown princess mean? Does it mean that my niece deliberately slandered the fifth prince? The crown princess is afraid. Aren't you deaf, and you haven't even heard the rumors in the city? There are rumors that the fifth prince is dragging him along. Is there anything strange about the fifth prince doing such a thing?" Just at this time, Baitu hurried back with someone. Upon seeing this, Concubine Yu stopped looking at Fan Kinjao and kept shouting to let the emperor make the decision. Baitu did hold the clothes in his hands, but he walked in front of the emperor first, whispered something in a low voice, and then handed the clothes in his hand to the emperor for inspection. Emperor Yongchang lowered his eyes slightly and carefully looked at the clothes in front of him. In the deserted garden, everyone held their breath and waited for the emperor to make the final verdict. I don't know how long it took before Emperor Yongchang looked at Yu Baiyan again. "Is this the dress you saw?" Yu Baiyan didn't even look at it and nodded. "This is exactly what I want to say to the emperor." Concubine Yu looked at such a scene, and her heart settled. She was just waiting to see how the emperor would punish the fifth prince. She would try to find a way to make the queen hold her nose and accept the marriage. Presumptuous. Concubine Yu was making clear calculations in her heart when she suddenly saw the emperor roaring angrily. Emperor Yongchang was really angry, and his whole face was twitching with rage. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw this scene, not knowing what was going on. Concubine Yu was shocked, but she quickly understood. She was afraid that the emperor was scolding the fifth prince. Thinking of this, she quickly said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. I know that the fifth prince did this, no, but fortunately Bayan is not in serious trouble, but this daughter's reputation is of course important. In your opinion, what should it be? I thought that if the fifth prince was willing to marry Baoyan, I would persuade my mother's family to settle the matter." Hearing this, Bai Tu's toes felt so embarrassed that they were about to dig through the ground. Concubine Yu is really smart in her life, but she was confused for a moment. The emperor is like this, and he still wants to grant a marriage. Just as Bai Tu was thinking about it, he saw Emperor Yongchang suddenly walking towards Concubine Yu. When he stood in front of Concubine Yu, he raised his foot and kicked Concubine Yu on the shoulder. Everyone stared at the scene in front of them, stunned. Concubine Yu was kicked and fell to the ground. It was really painful and she curled up. Seeing this, Yunyu rushed in front of the emperor. "Father, what are you doing? What are you doing? Let your mother and concubine take a good look at what happened to their family," Emperor Yongchang said, and directly smashed the clothes in his hands onto Yunyu's face. Yunyu took off her clothes in confusion, and used the lanterns in the hands of the surrounding palace people to shine. Her face turned pale in an instant. How could it be like this? Looking at this scene, Yu Beiyan's heart was pounding. She dared to look at the clothes in Yunyu's hand, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Why is there no bat pattern on this shirt? At this time, what else doesn't everyone understand? Concubine Yu's niece keeps insisting that she has a bat pattern, but the fifth prince's clothes don't even have one. Thinking again about how certain Yu Beiyan looked when she saw this dress just now, it was obvious that she was pretending to be confused and wanted to slander the fifth prince. Empress Zhen 11 looked at the scene in front of her and felt very shocked. In fact, when she knew something had happened, she thought of Lao Wu who had gone out to change clothes early, and she also guessed the reason why Feng Ming pretended to be sick and called Xiaoxian into the hall. But she didn't expect that things would develop to such a wonderful point. Thinking about the footprints that Concubine Yu had left on her back over the years, Queen Zhen 11 felt extremely happy. Concubine Yu, it turns out you have this day too. Although Yunyu was shocked, she was still making calculations in her heart. But just when she was about to speak, she heard Fan Qinjiao asking Bai Tu, "Maybe you are sure that these clothes belong to the fifth prince?" Bai Tu was waiting for the crown princess to say this, and hurriedly said respectfully, in reply to the crown princess, "I don't dare to deceive anything in front of the emperor. Behind me is the nun who helps the fifth prince change his clothes. The maid who sent it to the laundry garden and the palace official who took over the clothes of the fifth prince all asked and brought them over. They all believed that the clothes belonged to the fifth prince." The palace attendants behind them all nodded after listening to Bai Tu's words. Facing such irrefutable evidence, Yunyu's hopes that had just risen were extinguished again before she could even speak out. Yunyu didn't want to believe that Fan Qinjiao was really that smart and knew exactly what she was thinking, but now she had to delay the matter, otherwise not only the mother and concubine, but also their children would be implicated. "Father, my daughter believes that everything happened for a reason, but the mother and concubine were not present at the time. What happened needs to be carefully verified. The mother and concubine have followed the father for these years, giving birth to children for the father. Even if there is no merit, there is still hard work. Doesn't the father know what the mother and concubine think about the father? Yunyu is very smart. Since the evidence is not good for her, she simply plays the emotional card. Obviously, this trick really works for the emperor. The most important thing is that although they are both people who know medicine, Emperor Yongchang believes in Yunyu more than he does. So even if he was worried about Yunyu, Emperor Yongchang couldn't really study concubine Yu deeply. Come here, arrest the messenger and the people involved in the world, and hand them over to the criminal division for examination. The so-called person who is involved in the world is naturally Yu Baiyan. End of this chapter.